Now let me proceed to Ms. Gwen Robinson. Ms. Robinson is a senior fellow with ISIS currently, also currently senior Asia editor for the Nikkei Asian Review. Nikkei Asia Review is an upcoming regional affairs magazine. I think that it's worth your while to maybe look at it. It has the makings of what the Far Eastern Economic Review used to be. In addition, Gwen is a former correspondent for the Financial Times for many years, a veteran, well-renowned veteran journalist with the FT, posted in many capitals, including in Bangkok. So the floor is yours, Ms. Robinson.
Thanks, Dr. Tian. I would just like to talk really as with that mixture of background of a long-time journalist, correspondent, and now a senior fellow doing slightly more academic research on Myanmar. But I base my observations on the Rohingya issue on various trips to Rakhine State and some limited access on the ground there. Although, as has been mentioned, it's very difficult to get access to a lot of the more troubled areas, which has been part of the problem. I'd also like to take up from Jacques Leider's view, which is absolutely correct about the narrow nature of not just the agenda, but also, I think, the reporting and the representation of the issues and more disturbingly, the facts or factoids, as they often end up being on anything to do with not just Rohingya but sectarian violence in Myanmar. There are a lot of erroneous reports, a lot of sensationalism, and I would have to say, tragically, that boils down to the fact that the media everywhere in the world does like a good story, a stirring story. They like, heart-tearing human rights issues. They're always looking for headlines. And the government, by definition, governments tend to dislike, being accused of human rights abuses, nefarious policies. So you've got an extreme dynamic that comes to a head there in that one issue of Rohingya and their treatment in Rakhine State. And the positions are extreme in almost every way. What I'd like to focus on are how we can illustrate that, I think, and the escalating issues over the coverage and the perceptions of what's really going on there would be three particularly striking cases recently that I'd like to air. One is the extraordinary volume of reports, most of them very ill-sourced, that came out in January about an alleged massacre in northern Rakhine State at Duchi-Yartan, a village out of the northern city or town of Mongdor. And I presume most people are here today because you're following the issues and are interested, so you undoubtedly have read the extraordinary range of claims that came out of this. The Myanmar government, perhaps Dr. Choi Ing-lan can edify us on that later, but the Myanmar government has insisted that no Rohingya were killed. A policeman or two, I think, or maybe they said 6 policemen were missing. I've read, many different versions of that report. It's like Kurosawa's Rashomon, actually, in terms of the different so-called facts of the story. The UN has said 40 are believed to have died. The New York Times came out with a very big report last week claiming 22. So what's so disturbing, I think, is this is like 2 months, six weeks after the event. Nobody really knows. We can't be sure, but every media organisation has written about it and reported it and chosen whatever figures that happen to either convince them or fit their position on the issue. Then we had the expulsion of the NGO MSF from Rakhine State last month. Again, a very confused affair where all the headlines said that they'd been kicked out of Myanmar altogether, and then there was some backpedaling, which in fact is what happened. I think it was negotiated, and we now are told that MSF is still operating in Myanmar, but not in Rakhine State. They've been asked to suspend operations there. Again, they've been involved in reports about the Mongdor attacks. MSF spokesmen were cited saying they treated about 22 injured people, believed to be Rohingya, from that attack. The government, the media has reported that that was the last straw for the government, which has been troubled by MSF's activities, and MSF is in the firing line in Rakhine State as from many accusations that they've been biased, that their aid efforts are focused too much on the Rohingya and not enough on the Buddhist Rakhine community. That leads again to something else Jacques touched on, which is this uneven approach that I think it has to be said that the Western world, because we see so much, we see the inequalities in Rakhine State, and particularly conveyed through Greg Constantine's images. The it's very clear that the real plight is with the Rohingya. They're the ones who are stateless. They're the ones taking to sea in boats. But at the same time, there are very real, genuine grievances amongst the Buddhist Rakhine, which I think personally the media does not really air very much. That's partly because they're reasonably hostile. They're not particularly welcoming to media. When I'm in Rakhine State, a lot of the Rakhine Buddhists feel defensive. They know that they've been accused by the West of perpetrating a lot of the abuses. I think a lot of them feel very defensive, and they are being whipped along, of course, by the darker forces, which are particularly what you all know, the escalation of religious extremism and this gathering movement, which is really very disturbing, of activist monks and related extremist groups now taking it to a new level and taking their fight to Parliament. And I'd say that's a third case where we need some accurate reporting. But what you've got is a convergence of forces now that are working on legislation. You've got draft legislation about to be presented to Parliament, or at least it's under negotiation, including for banning interfaith marriages between Buddhists and Muslims, and several other disturbing trends. However, all of these key issues, and they're so important, and they are the issues that the media seizes on to actually portray what's going on, and no wonder that shapes our opinions. We can't be there on the ground ourselves, and I can assure you that even if you are, you come away at the end of every day, if you're in Sitway, feeling that you really aren't getting to the bottom of things. It's very confusing, and facts are very scarce on the ground. So I would say that these are the sort of things that we really do need more information on. How do we progress from there? I would say that, first of all, the media really, and I say the media meaning, every aspect, electronic, paper, international and domestic, need to be far more responsible when they realise that, or when they should realise that these reports can trigger further violence, fuel resentments, and you can see when you're on the ground in Myanmar, when a fresh report comes out about either some outrage or some extremist Buddhist attack, reports of deaths or reports that a Rohingya group did something awful to some local Buddhist community, you can see the immediate effect. There are retaliatory attacks, or these facts are seized on. I think media need to understand that it's such a delicate situation that you can actually clearly with irresponsible reporting you can actually cause more deaths than injuries. But I'd say it's also contingent on the non-government organisations, aid groups that are publishing reports that come out headlined systematic genocide, crimes against humanity. For example, and I'd say this recent report, Fortify Rights, which maybe most people in this room have read about, it got immense coverage 2 weeks ago. Maybe there's a representative in the room. Some very good information in here, some forensic looks at past rules and regulations. However, and it's not entirely the organisation's fault, but the media leapt on this report to come up with headlines that really implied, A, that these were all central government policies and this was the current central government. So you saw reports saying there were these leaked documents, secretive policies that are aimed at curbing Rohingya rights and very abusive practices, fertility control, all sorts of things. If you read into it, a lot of these are small local or state government edicts that came out many years ago. The most recent was 2008, well before this government came out. And, that is clear once you read the report, but I think a lot of people don't read the full report, they read the media headlines. And again, Human Rights Watch, a lot of excellent material on the ground last year, came out with a report on genocide, implying that the central government had a secret or discrete policy of systematically ethnically cleansing Rohingya from Rakhine State. Well, that is also overstating the fact, and clearly no side in Myanmar are very happy with this situation. There's a lot to answer for, I think, on the central government part as well, but I think as I said, these other players, media, non-government organisations, international organisations, and also, it has to be said, foreign governments need also to be more careful about jumping to conclusions or condemning before we get facts. But this leads back to my point that it is very hard to get facts, and I think it's important to have at least a couple of sources before you make your mind up about what did happen or what the latest permutation is. I think Thailand is also under that kind of pressure at the moment, with all these kind of reports of boat people coming from the Rohingya refugees, what's happening to them, the conditions they're held in. And I'd say that I think that there should be a lot more focus also by the media on these, not just the national government, which does not have a secret policy document on systematic ethnic cleansing or genocide. Maybe some elements within the government feel that way, but I'm pretty sure there isn't a proper policy on that. But the spotlight is on the central government and less on this whole substructure that actually is perpetuating and deepening the problems, including middlemen, human traffickers who are preying on Rohingya to ship them out. But also, you can see when you are in Rakhine State, Ong Mingala, you saw the images from Greg's powerful photos, the camps which I've been into. Some of them are not nearly as bad as reports make out, but the ones that you can't access, I've heard, are very substandard in some cases. But what you've got in these camps is thriving communities of middlemen who are making huge amounts, well, relatively huge for local conditions, money, ferrying Rohingya refugees to markets and giving them access, or selling mobile phones, all kinds of things. There is a whole industry now in Rakhine State that is actually quite happy with the situation as it stands, because a lot of people have found new ways to make a living, and also, the segregation and the increasing segregation is creating various opportunities there. So, I'd like to see the media maybe take on more of these kind of elements, and local governments and these extremist groups that are whipping things up, as well as blaming it all on the central government. And I'd say, though, that, the last point I'd make here is that in terms of discussing media and the presentation of the Rohingya issue, it's back to Myanmar's central government really needs to be more open, disseminate more information. Maybe Dr. Chewing Line can talk a little about that. And they have tried to be more open with briefings and things, but I think journalists do complain that a lot is stated as good intentions that never transpire, and really probably I'd say there is really not enough clarity or access, very hard to get to the camps, and as long as there isn't an opening up and more transparency on this issue on the part of the government, they will continue to get misleading, sensationalised media reports. So, you know, that is, that's how I would like to end my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. We can relate to that here in Thailand. It's very difficult to tell stories in conflict areas, to tell balanced stories. There's always a bias one way or the other, or perceived bias, and we have more media tools. But in fact, it's more difficult to get to the truth with more media tools, and the social media can actually exacerbate these misperceptions and untruths. Now, our next speaker, we will come back to all of this, and I think that so far we've had two speakers who are saying, I think, spot on that the real stories are much more in depth, you know, beyond the headlines, and that goes for many conflict areas, not just in Rakhine State. The next speaker is Dr. Chong Yin Lang. He's just arrived last night, this morning. His luggage did not arrive, so he apologized for being dressed in jeans and informally, and I said that's a good thing, because you know it keeps expectations low. They think you've just walked off the street and just entered a seminar room. Dr. Chow, in fact, is an old friend and colleague of mine. We've known each other 20 years since he was a lecturer in Hong Kong, in Singapore. I've lectured in your class, I think, at one time in 2006. And he's been all around, and when Myanmar had some opening, Dr. Chaw was one of the pioneers in trying to promote reform. He ran egress, and now he's with the Myanmar Peace Center. He's an advisor to President Thein Sein. At first we were very nervous that you wouldn't make it, because the president asked him to go see the president in Naypyidaw just yesterday, but thankfully you've made it. So now I think you have some comments to make. I think a lot of people are waiting to hear from the government side. Again, the story is much more nuanced and complicated than we would see in the headlines. But yet the headlines are important, because it's not so easy to tell complex stories in concise words and images. So we have a dilemma there. Dr. Chaw.
Thank you, Titinan, for your very generous introduction. I would like to make a few clarifications, which is, I'm here as an individual. As Titinan said, I'm an academic, and I've been working on this issue since around 2008. So even though I'm working with the government, what I'll be saying here, what I'll be covering in my presentation, will not reflect the view of the government. I'm going to speak as freely as I can. But one thing I really want to request you is not to quote me out of context. So many of you here know that I was a part of this investigation commission like in the last 12 months or so, the first one as well as the most recent one. And then in fact, we just released the Burmese version of the Duchiaran report. So I'll be happy to answer whatever questions you might have. I also reserve not to answer. And then also, if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know. And again, just like, you know, I'm here as a scholar, so I will analyze. But like, you know, this issue has been overly politicized, and then like, you know, people can get into trouble easily. So for someone like myself, like, you know, who has been doing a part of the investigation, I know a lot. I won't hide that. But at the same time, I don't have the liberty to reveal everything. That's for the sake of the people, not the government. But I'll try to answer whatever questions you might have as much as I can. So let me start with the current situation in Rakhine State. My two colleagues talk about how that the issue has been misconstrued or misconceived. But here, the situation there is still very, very volatile, as all of you guys can imagine. And then a small thing, even a small incident could still trigger a major riot. That is the situation. And I've been traveling around the country in the last 24 months. I'm also part of the peace process. So the only place I feel a bit unsafe is in northern Rakhine. I've been to the areas where they are full of landmines, but I didn't feel the same way I felt whenever I have to go to the conflict areas in Rakhine State. A major problem that I won't have time to go through all the points I would like to make, but I'll just highlight some of the key factors that contributed to the current fragile state in Rakhine State. The level of distrust, it's still very, very high. And right now, most of the problems in the areas many of the riots, or I should say most of the riots, took place largely because there's little trust between Muslims and the government, local government officials, and then between the two contentious communities. This is not a recent development. Since, as Jacques said earlier, since the 1930s and 1940s, the tension was there. And then people from both communities, they went through this negative socialization process. What happened in 1942, 1943 is vividly remembered by younger people, even though they were not there, but they grew up hearing how the ancestors were mistreated by Muslims in that area. Of course, history got constructed and reconstructed. The reality, it doesn't matter that much anymore. How the story was relayed. The same thing. I talked to many Muslims, and then they didn't and they don't trust the government officials, and then Rakhine people. But the distress was there deep down, and when something happened, and then I must say, there are good and bad people in both communities. I have worked with some Muslim leaders and then some regular Muslim community members, and then they're really nice people. Even privately, Rakhine people, Rakhine community leaders I talk to or I interview admit that there are good Muslims around, but deep down, the underlying distrust was there, and then hardliners and troublemakers took advantage of this sort of situation, and then provoked people to turn against each other. That is a major problem, and it's still going on. But what happened is all the conferences that Jacques mentioned in his presentation, and then how the issue was described in the media. Rakhine thought that they were being, the international community, international media is being unfair to them, and then that sort of empowered hardliners in their own community, and then no matter what we do, they're not going to be fair to us. There won't be balanced coverage. So the kind of hardliners successfully convinced many people, many regular Rakhines and Buddhists, not to do anything with Muslims. So this situation can be visible, clearly visible in southern Rakhine, where normally the relations between Muslims and Rakhine were pretty good, but recently nationalists that like sort of change their mindset, and then like even people in that area, even though they used to have good relations with Muslim, and they now don't want to do anything with them. And the same thing on the side of the Muslims, like I walk in there, like they didn't really. I mean, the problem, like I've been doing research on this in the last since the since September 2012, serious research, and going back and forth between Yangon and Rakhine State. I have that one major problem, which is when I talk to Rakhine, they're very angry. I mean, so much so that they would point their finger at me, and you are a traitor, and then like you are siding with the Muslims, foreigners. They would yell at me, and they would not answer my questions. The problem with Muslims is the opposite. They will tell you whatever you want to hear. Right or wrong doesn't matter. And then it has become really difficult to do research on the ground. And then we have to spend a long time to get some information. And then the problem is they have been taught how to answer. And in some areas, the one we were doing research for the first report, after third or the second or third person, they try to remember the questions we ask. Because we were doing the structured interview, so they get the same set of questions where we are being asked to different people. So, gradually people started taking out a sheet and then started reading the answers. And then when we changed the order of the questions, they started giving the wrong answers. So they kind of this is the situation. Partly because they to be fair to all these ordinary people, they felt unsafe, and then they they didn't know they could not rely on the government, so they had to rely on whoever would back them up. And then people from both communities have been manipulated by some people. I don't really know who they are that much, but they are being manipulated. And then that wasn't the situation. And then gradually the level of trust for each other has gone, and it got lower and lower. And then right at this moment, it's extremely difficult for us, when we go down there and do research and collect the information, to bring some Rakhines to Muslims area, mainly because what we do is whenever we interview Muslims who cannot speak either Rakhine or Myanmar language, we try to have two interpreters. One Muslim, one Rakhine, so that they can check each other, and then we don't want to have problems later. So, but in some areas, even in Sitwe, whenever there's a Rakhine interpreters, they will not answer. They will not even come to us. So, so this is the current state of the trust for each other, and then which is pretty good. Jacques, the way I look at this particular issue is sort of like a movement and counter movement. For Muslims, they're very good at mobilizing international support. They try to empower their own community, the movement, through international support, but internally they're pretty bad at it. Right now it's even the name Rohingya, we conducted survey, not just in Rakhine State, in many parts of the country, not a single Buddhist, not a single Christian would endorse. I mean, ethnic, Christians. I'm not talking about foreign Christians. This is not, of course, totally representative. I don't say that. I'm talking about the trend. Would endorse the name as an official name. So here, I don't want to say that the entire population or whatever. We interview only about 1,000 people, and what I'm trying to say here is the trend, not conclusive state. But one thing we can conclude from such finding is a large majority of the people don't accept this particular name, at least right at this moment. And many the counter movement from Rakhine, and then now being backed by some Buddhist extremists and Buddhist nationalists, these people they're pretty bad at explaining their cause to the international community, but they're very, very successful within the country. Not that everybody supported them, but at the same time, people who could be sympathetic to human rights situations in Rakhine State, I think that they became more indifferent, partly because of such movement. So, right now, it's the opening political space. I hate to say it, but in all other areas, it's really good. But in Rakhine State, the opening political space sort of allow people from both communities, especially more I should not say Rakhine State, when it comes to the Rakhine issue, people take they take advantage of the opening space and make their case. So again, abusing the space. I'm not saying that democracy caused this. Some people, democratic culture is still not matured, and then people are using the situation in their favor, not finding solution only to make their cause. And then the second issue is citizenship. And then I for one think that many of these people, I don't know how many, that's the government will have to do the verification. Many of these people, they have lived in the country for many years, and then they should be granted citizenship, and then they should be able to enjoy the citizenship rights like other citizens. But here, I'm not the only one. When we interviewed many Rakhine people, they're not against granting citizenship to Muslims either. But the problem is, here in our country, the status of ethnic nationality and citizenship, they are two different things. Ethnic nationality, if you are ethnic nationality, and if you have, if there are sufficient number of people of ethnic nationality living in one area, you can ask for self-administrative zone, and then also you can have a proper representation in the local government and stuff. So what's going on here is many people are not against the granting citizenships to Muslims, but they are worried that if the status of ethnic nationality is granted to Muslims, then part of the Rakhine State will be taken away. So right now is because of low level of trust and then this sort of politicized issue, these two things are worsening the situation. And then that's what I like it, that the Muslim leaders are not very good at convincing Rakhine communities, cannot try to, they are not very good at ameliorating that they are worried either. So this is and then right at this moment, if I have to say it, the government, this is, this issue is a very unpopular issue in the country. And right at this moment, no one wants to talk about it. You look at the opposition to the parliament. Who in the parliament, with the exception of Muslim the MPs, talk about this particular issue? Who in the parliament try to protect these people? The same thing, not just in the parliament, in the government, no one wants to take the blame. But when it comes to elections, what matters is the votes from the large majority of the people, not from 1 million people. So this is the reality. So the current government, we recommended it in the previous report, in the first report, to work on the citizenship status of these people. They sort of tried to do it, but they did try, and then we tried to collect some information on what they have done. But look, somehow they didn't do a good job. The government didn't do a good job in convincing these people that this verification process the government is trying to undertake would really help them. So local people, because of the low level of trust, didn't cooperate. for a long time. Then later, like, the government is now very busy with the census, so they will have to wait until the census is over. And then, like, we just submitted our second report. We haven't released it yet. I have a copy here, but we will be releasing this report on the with the press, and then we will be releasing it around, hopefully on 11th. By that time we should have a copy, and then we should also have an English version of major findings and recommendations on that day. So we will try to upload it online. This is like, what I read, like media, and then, like, the most Islamic communities, like, at least they should give the government a chance, to get this thing done. And then otherwise, like, it's really, really a problem. It will become problematic. And then, like, the people who have to live in IDP camps, and then, like, of course, they cannot have the kind of life they have in their own home. Like, we cannot say that like, the situation there is good, but, like, unless the low level of trust, and then so many ongoing problems, like, if the government send them back to their original places, there will be many more riots. So we really have to work on the citizenship issue before we, they can be sent back to their original places. That's one problem. And I can go on, but let me switch to the next issue, which is, like, both Glenn and Jacques sort of touched upon it, exaggeration, and then also rumors. These things are killing many people over there. I mean it literally. So exaggeration, so like both sides, and like, sometimes I don't know where that rumor came from. It wasn't really true. Like, the Bangladeshi ambassador in Yangon told us, there was in Bangladesh newspaper, it was reported that a mosque in Sitwe was burned down. And then he called up the Bangladesh consulate in Sitwe, and it wasn't true. Many rumors out there, and then lots of exaggeration. So the the exaggeration didn't help at all. And then when we were conducting research for Duchiran report, so many the rumors and stuff. So we interviewed people, and then we put out even though we have security, they were several hundred meters away from us, and then we sit down, and then okay, tell us the truth. If you tell us the truth, and if we have the evidence, and then we will used it in the report. But the problem is, people talk about it, they hated one village headman. So they more than 6 people said this village headman killed their own people, their own family members. At the same, at the same time, they at this around this time, this person killed my family member this way, and then this person got to be in 6 different places to kill all of them. So that's it became really problematic, for us to substantiate whatever they're saying. That's and then one woman even said, this village had thrown the baby into the air and then kept the baby with a sword into 2. So that's how, the situation was tense, and then things like that. It didn't have time for them to happen. So we did do 2 different research. We sent 2 different teams to the area. At the very beginning, all the stories they said were how grown-ups were killed, and then the last trip, many of the stories were about children. And then it said the time they said that, and then many people said that the children got drowned. Okay, and then when the drowning took place, security forces were not there, that they admitted, but they didn't okay, show us a picture, just and then where are the bodies, and then they couldn't really give us any concrete information. For us, having done research in that area, people tend to exaggerate. We cannot just work on their statement alone, they got, although what they are saying got to be backed by a little more concrete evidence, and that didn't happen. And then like the fire in Tuchiran West, the fire took place. A lot of people said the police officers ran them down, and then but the police officers took a video of extinguishing the fire, so the kind of it was there, and then like we asked one woman whose house was is located right next to the incident, where the area where the fire took place, and then, well, what happened? Your house was now burned down, and then this person said, well, like the police and firemen, they spray water on my house, that's why it wasn't burned down. And then a bunch of women yell at her, oh no, don't do that, don't say that, like don't say that, they spray water on your house. Then what happened is, when people start to exaggerate like that, it's a very difficult for us, to really substantiate. Then what happened? Police raided after they lost the police officer. Security forces, the police battalions raided the village. During that time, people must got hurt. We checked a large number of people, and some people who said, they were pushed out, one they were running, and then those things did happen. And the people got hurt, but we recorded it and we reported it, but for from OHCHR report to some other reports, we look into all allegations, and then we didn't really see any credible evidence for that. Any of you here, if you have any evidence, any pictures, please let me know. Even though we already submitted the report, I can still submit more memos to the government. But one thing is here, many people like to jump to the conclusion easily, and then if the finding is in line with what they think happened, then the finding is good. If the finding is not in line with what they think that happened, and then then the find that this report is bad, and then that will be. I mean, I would not entertain such criticism. I'll just smile at that person. But if you have evidence, I'm not saying that I don't know what happened. I went there only a month after the thing happened, so I cannot say I know what happened. But what I know is, we did the research. We tried to gather the data as much as we can. Then we walk around. People were saying that it was the security forces were firing guns, sort of like a shower of bullets. But we didn't see a single bullet holes in any place anywhere in the village. We walk around just to find that, slacks that they could take away. But bullet holes, all of houses are still there. No house was, with the exception of the ones burned down, no house was dismantled or destroyed completely, and then we didn't find it. And then, the Western embassies received some photos from some people from Rakhine State, but they didn't even share it with us, mainly because they checked it and they were all doctored. So, here, for something like that happen, we and they, and then oh, he's working for the government, and we don't trust. This is the occasion like this. All of us, if you want the truth, we must all work together instead of exaggerating the situation, instead of worsening the situation. And then people if you have evidence, if you have more information, let us know. I'll be happy to look into it. And then methodologically also, you cannot just listen to people. I'm sorry to say, I feel for them. like, you know, I mean, I shouldn't be saying it, but like, you know, every time I go there, listening to these people, like, you know, 1 to 2 weeks, I would be having nightmare. Like, you know, if I go there just to interview these people, I go back to Yangon and living safely, and that these people who live in terrible situations and how traumatized they would be, I can feel for them. But at the same time, when we prepare the report, it's like, you know, well, you cannot just listen to these people. We have to try to make the methodology as scientific as possible, which we try the best we can. I'm not saying that the method we use is perfect, but you go out there, listen to people, and I came up with this, like, you know, the theatrical, like reporting of what happened over there. That will not help. And then the two more, like, you know, how much time do I have? Yeah, and then international communities, international assistance. International assistance is needed. International NGOs need to be there, no doubt. But at the same time, like, you know, they really need to go there with open mind, and then, like, you know, helping people over there. And many of them, they did go there to help people. Like, you know, I've worked with them, and I've talked to them, like, I've listened to them. But at the same time, sometimes it's like, you know, they also need to do a lot more. Like, you know, right now, they're not very good at explaining to local people in one important thing, which is the difference between humanitarian assistance and development assistance. Of course, when it comes to humanitarian assistance of Muslims, there are more Muslim IDPs, so they should receive more assistance. But, like, you know, Rakhines over there don't understand the situation. Oh, these guys only want to help Muslim, they don't want to help us. And then, like, you know, they need to reach out these Rakhine people, try to explain, and then when I talk to them, they say, oh, we already did it. How many times? Once. And then they attack us, so we stop. And then, like, you know, they attack us, they criticize us. So, like, you know, they got to do a better job in terms of explaining like, you know, the difference between development and humanitarian assistance. What Rakhine people need is development assistance, not humanitarian. But it is not there, and then people immensely misunderstood the situation, and then they started misinterpreting what international organizations are doing. So, and then, like, you know, if you end up sending arrogant people, then of course it's such a situation got worse. I'm one of the people, I would say, who try to defend MSF, you know, to go and talk about it. But the problem, what's going on is MSF, like, you know, some of the, not all, to be fair to them, but some of the MSF employees there, they're very arrogant. And then, like, you know, right now, people think that the government is doing this. Like, you know, we briefed this report to the president yesterday. We talked that the president, like, you know, understands the situation. But what's really good, it's not that they want to kick the MSF out of the Rakhine state. What's really going on is not giving in to what the pressure of Rakhine people, but local government officials from several townships unanimously said that they cannot work with MSF. The government, the central government, has to rely on local government officials to run the administration. A considerable number of local state officials come out and said that we cannot work with the government. They cannot ignore such the comment. And I'm not, like, you know, when we were interviewing people, like, we interview a large number of local government officials. The problem is Rakhine will complain. The government shouldn't ignore, but the government would not ask MSF to suspend their activities simply because Rakhine did not want them. But they need to review the situation. What the president also said to us is, it's not like, you know, we don't have problem with the organization per se, but some of their people are that, like, you know, probably creating problems, or they don't understand the situation over there. That's why we need to review the situation. So, like, you know, they just need to convince the government that they can work with local government officials. And then, like, we were told that they will be allowed to resume their their activities. But how soon? It depends on how quickly they can convince local government officials. That's like, you know, we now have like a center called Center for Diversity and National Harmony. That particular center is the planning to organize a meeting between local government officials and the MSF staff, not just MSF, international NGO, members of the international NGO. So meetings like that should help. One last thing, like, you know, even though I still have many, but I will just talk about one last thing. And then this is UN agencies, international NGOs, like, you know, local NGOs. Everybody is talking about bringing the two communities together. Right at this moment, if you try to bring the two communities together, you'll be wasting a lot of resources. You will be even worsening the situation. And even if you claim to bring them together, there will be same old people living in Yangon, not from Sitwe. The reason is, you don't just bring them together. You need to prepare these people for the meetings. And the Rakhine leaders told me, yeah, we know that we got to do something. And then you are talking about national reconciliation between the two communities. People on the ground don't even understand what reconciliation means. And then, like, you know, they think that, oh, reconciliation means we will have to live with these Muslims side by side. This is not the right time. If they move into our neighborhood again, there will be more riots. We don't want it. So that's sort of misinterpretation. So we need to prepare both communities, like, you know, before we bring them together. And then that's the center I mentioned a little earlier is trying to do that. Of course, as we all know, this is a very complicated issue. And then, like, you know, like, since I have been doing research on this issue pretty much almost every day in the last like, you know, 20 months or so, I still got a lot to do, but I'll stop here since we have time constraint. Thank you.